agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Michael Baranowski, a professor of political science at Northern Kentucky University. I'm joined today by my conservative counterpart, Cleveland area attorney and defender of freedom, Jay Carson.
Hey, good morning, Mike.
Hey, Jay, how are you doing this morning?
Well, for those who missed last week's bonus show, I'll repeat. I'm feeling solitary, nasty, brutish, and short.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's that. Maybe we can improve on that. I don't know, but we have a lot to talk about this week, as always. A whole bunch of things, like, for instance, more on the Trump raid. I want to get into the Espionage Act a little bit. Primary elections, right, in Alaska and Wyoming, and what they maybe say about Donald Trump's hold on the Republican Party, and then some COVID type stuff, like that news about the CDC reorganization and the COVID relief fraud, which is, Jay, you called it a while ago, right? Not a small thing, certainly. And so a whole bunch of stuff we want to get into, and we will get into it in just 1 second. Okay, Jay, so last week, we opened the show with a discussion of the FBI's, unprecedented search of Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago home and office. And at that time, the warrant had only just been released, and I was inclined to believe that, the warrant wouldn't have been approved by a federal judge without solid grounds. And Jay, you were a little more skeptical given some of the stuff about the FBI's history of not exactly dotting I's and crossing T's and using whiteout in various circumstances and that sort of thing. But neither of us at the time had access to the affidavit that was supporting the warrant request, and I suggested, based on,
and we still don't.
Yeah, and I thought,
let's make that clear. We don't.
yeah, we don't have any space. Well, if we did, we wouldn't say. But anyway, I suggested that based on past precedent, that it was really unlikely that we would actually get that information. But this week, in a move that really surprised a lot of people on both the left and the right, Judge Bruce Reinhart ordered the government to prepare a redacted version of the affidavit in response to a request made by a number of media organizations, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Dow Jones and Company, the Wall Street Journal folks. And in his order, Reinhart said it was really important that the public have as much information as it can about the search, that the government had not met its burden of showing that the entire affidavit should remain sealed, and that he was leaning toward releasing parts of the affidavit. So it seems like there's, some likelihood that we'll be getting at least some additional information here. And so, Jay, I wanted to start here by getting your take on what you think about the government's argument for not releasing anything, and also, I think, how you see the balance between transparency in a very unusual, high-profile case like this, and also, on the other side, I think, the need for law enforcement to not basically provide sort of a roadmap of an investigation to the targets of that investigation.
Yeah. So, the idea of the roadmap makes perfect sense when you're talking about arresting drug dealers and other folks who might be working in concert with others, and you would give away what information you have, how you got that information, perhaps identifying confidential sources, those sorts of things that would put lives at risk and would certainly impede the investigation. So that idea makes perfect sense in the context of those more typical type of criminal investigations. I think it makes less sense, again, based on what we know, right? Because we don't know a whole lot still. But if the gist of this is Trump had documents he shouldn't have, my sense is there's not a whole lot. Where else does the investigation go? He either had them or he didn't. The government has them now. Prosecution will likely turn on the legal question rather than the factual question of, was this permissible? Did he have the required scienter, I guess, to commit the crime? those sorts of things, as opposed to, again, tracking down new facts or finding new witnesses or something like that. So that's why that it rings a little hollow for me here. I think to the extent that concerns have been raised about if you had someone who is a confidential informant, for example, at Mar-a-Lago, who said, "Hey, he's got the nuclear secrets sitting on the pool table or something." Obviously there may be Trump people and fanatics who could put those persons' lives at risk. So I think there ought to be redaction of confidential source information. Again, that said, even there, if we know that if there was a confidential source, which my guess is there maybe not, inside Mar-a-Lago, again, that's a pretty closed universe, and you know who's working there. So that's my sense of. I don't see where a lot of the rationale that you typically would have for sealing an indictment or sealing an affidavit play here in light of the big picture, which is public trust in the FBI and the legitimacy of the warrants. To clarify what I said last week, I mean I don't doubt that the information provided to the judge was established probable cause for the warrants. I would be very surprised, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's a very low bar to get over,
right?
And essentially, all you need to say is someone say, "Hey, I've got personal knowledge that Trump's got these documents that he shouldn't have," and that's the easy bar to get over. The more difficult bar was the FBI telling the truth when it did that, and I think again, I typically you would give them the presumption that they're telling the truth, but in light of what we've seen from the FBI with changing emails from the CIA, lying to federal judges to get warrants, coming up with a plan B in case Trump is elected, trying to come up with a Logan Act prosecution for Michael Flynn. I don't know that they're entitled to that benefit of the doubt anymore. And I think the judge is right saying there is substantial public interest, not just public interest in, boy, the public would like to know this, but there's a public interest in believing and knowing that your Justice Department is operating within its bounds. And on this kind of investigation.
Yeah.
I think a judge. Go ahead.
I was going to say on the FBI trust sort of issue, I think also should point out that, those of us on the left often believe that there's that certainly at the time Director Comey's comments right about the Clinton investigation, which was definitely against FBI sort of standard practice of announcing that, may have actually cost her that very close election. So this is not just the FBI is a bunch of progressives led in secret meetings by AOC that are trying to take down Donald Trump. This is a question of, I think, trust and competence and following sort of apolitical procedures more generally.
Sure. Okay. I suppose you can look at that from the left. From the right, the way I would tend to look at it is, listen, if this is if there's an investigation being conducted by Sergeant Joe Friday, right, that he's swearing out the warrant, man, I feel a lot better that Joe Friday, that just the facts, straight shooter, by the book cop, is telling the truth and is trustworthy. And look, if he thinks we need a warrant to go in to the former president's house, there's probably something there, and that's maybe I'll give Joe Friday the benefit of the doubt. I would not give Roscoe P. Coltrane the benefit of the doubt when he's always trying to get them Duke boys And that's what this strikes me more as, right? I mean, you've had this sort of
I see.
history,
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
and that's why I think it's sort of like, well, and the story again is, hey, Trump's a spy, and that's
well,
okay,
I don't know that
for
that's
6 years now.
I don't know that that's the story. At least there are some folks on the far left, the sort of left conspiracy theory people who may believe that, but I don't think that that's
that he was going to sell this to the Russians or the Chinese or whatever to get cash. So
yeah, I think that's some of that crazy tin hat stuff on the far left.
Oh, I do. Yeah,
that
so do
stuff
I.
on the far right. It's like more likely a case.
But keep in mind there was a period of time when the FBI's position was essentially painting Trump as a potential Russian spy.
Sure, and I think that you make that case about, well, it's the Roscoe P. Coltrane out to get those Duke boys, but you can look at it the same way. A different way, saying that, well, when you have a candidate and then a president as unique, I'll use kind of a neutral word, as unique as Donald Trump, with the sort of ties to hostile foreign powers that no other presidential candidate or serious presidential candidate or president has actually had, that creates certain problems that I would argue that the system that we have in place was not designed to really address. And so
I suppose
this being somewhat of a unique situation, the FBI and the DOJ was sort of kind of making it up as it went along, and clearly they have gotten some things wrong. There's no question in my mind about that, right? But and I think you would probably agree. You and I would both agree with Mike Pence, right? That the solution is not to defund the FBI,
right.
Pence has been
no. I don't think it's the FBI as a whole. I do think it is. Well, and again, I don't want to suggest. I tried to choose my pop culture analogies precisely, and but what I'm saying is the Duke boys really should be investigated by local law enforcement for a whole bunch of reasons.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, they're always, reckless driving, shooting arrows out of cars with dynamite, and I think moonshining, and all sorts of things.
That was Uncle Jesse, but yeah, they were related to it. Sure, absolutely. Okay.
Yes,
We're showing our age here, but yeah.
Yeah. So no, I'm not saying that the Duke boys are above reproach, but what I'm saying is when you have the sheriff who is always out to get them, and will cut corners in order to do so, that's where I think I'm not entitled to. I'm not going to give Roscoe the benefit of the doubt that I do to Joe Friday.
Well, and of course, the whole point is not to.
And I hope everyone gets all my pop culture references.
Oh, I'm sure they won't, because we're old, and we're much older than most of our listeners, and so we'd have to use references that we wouldn't even know. So, but I get your references, Jay, and that's the important thing as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, so I guess I hear what you're saying. But I think part of the problem is if we have a system where you are evaluating the character of the person and whether or not to grant the benefit of the doubt, you have a problem right there. Because we have a system that's not built on that, because sometimes you'll have people who seem to have good character and don't actually. So we have a system that's supposed to be built on providing clear, documented evidence, because that way we don't have to say, well, is because most people aren't clearly either Joe Friday or Roscoe P. Coltrane. They're like, people's like, I don't know, some agent came to me and I hope he or she is okay. But the point is the system's supposed to be a system of laws and not of men or women.
Yeah, but I want to distinguish, though. There's sort of two tracks that I'm talking about.
Okay.
Here. The first being the legal and the second being the political.
All right.
And I think that from the legal standpoint of is there probable cause to issue a warrant? Okay, that's a clear legal question. You do that. From the political standpoint, and I guess this is sort of a secondary legal standpoint, right, where you're weighing release of that affidavit. What is the how strong is the public interest in releasing that information? And my point is, I think the public interest is stronger when you have a potential Roscoe P. Coltrane type situation, when there is the public distrust is a fact that figures into the legal analysis. You know what I mean?
Okay, so I will say when you have a perceived Roscoe P. Coltrane sort of thing. Okay,
exactly.
And whether it's actual or not. Sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a better way to put it, because the interest that ought to be served is, one, either assuring the public that it is not Roscoe who is in control, or two, if it is Roscoe, lowering the boom on him.
Right. Okay. I feel like almost for the for the picture that goes along with this episode, I always put up. I'm gonna have to find a Roscoe P. Coltrane sort of thing here, because he's come up more, I think, in this one episode than we probably. I don't know if we've ever actually mentioned Roscoe before, but there you go.
I'm sure we've met. Oh, I know we had a whole thing on the Duke boys at one point.
Okay.
The General Lee and the Confederate flag.
Oh yeah, I'm sure he came up there.
Well, and then when the Duke boys were canceled from CMT or whatever.
Yeah, I'm not sure who Boss Hogg would be in this analogy. But anyway, so I wanted to ask, so it seems to me,
and I do while we're on, I do want to throw in one more thing.
Okay, yeah, because
I'll tell you, I don't watch Fox News. I'll tend to watch like bits and pieces of Brett Baer.
It's like one of the sane ones, yeah,
which is more straight news stuff.
Yeah.
But occasionally, at the end of that, it bleeds over into the primetime stuff. And so I've had bits and pieces of that on in the background before I switch over to Wheel of Fortune, which is America's Game, Mike.
There you go.
But I think what some of these people on Fox have done in terms of attacking the judge is clearly out of bounds, and I do want to. I just say that, right? I mean, I'm sort of, everyone says, "Oh, Drew's losing to Fox News," and but I don't. I mean, they describe him as the corrupt, judge and all this stuff. I think you can make an argument of, look, perhaps he should have recused himself in this if he recused himself in the other Trump case, although. Again, we don't even know necessarily the reasons for his recusal there. And I think you could make an argument if I'm the judge. Look, this isn't I'm not hearing the case. I'm deciding probable cause and a warrant, and that's sort of different. So look, I'm not saying that there isn't something there to say, gee, could he have done it better or recused himself or had another judge do this to avoid the potential appearance of bias or something like that. But saying that is something entirely different than saying the corrupt, crooked judge and, the FBI judge shopped and all this kind of stuff. Well, I mean, they went to the federal court where Mar-a-Lago is. I mean, that's
what you do.
That's the place to go.
So, and you are.
I don't.
I was going to say, and you are not calling for civil war here. Let's be clear. Jay is not behind or supporting any calls for civil war. You're generally,
and I guess that's just, and that's sort of the weird place I find myself in so often is, I think it's perfectly okay to say, hey, I have concerns about this.
Sure.
And quite another to say, this is a crooked, corrupt,
right,
judge, this is civil war, that kind of thing. So I just wanted to.
It seems to me that how this could possibly play out is that DOJ gives the judge these redactions, and it's basically just like one big blacked out Sharpie thing with a couple of adjectives.
That's my guess is what they're going to come back with. Yeah,
and the judge says, "Well, no, you need to." Redact less, and then it goes back and forth. There's an appeal if the judge says, well, this is what we're going to release. And I mean, I think it's going to be, it seems to me it's likely to be a while before we see much of anything, because we have no idea what even would happen on appeal here. Yeah,
and that's exactly right. That's what I think will happen. There'll be some back and forth, and then there'll be an order, and whatever that order is, DOJ will appeal it. Which to me, that's going to be sort of telling, right? And
And I think maybe you can see, I mean, I don't know anything about Judge Reinhardt really, but given the threats and the other stuff that he dealt with, I could understand, and I'm not saying this is the case because I have no way of knowing, where he might actually, it makes sense where from on the personal level, he'd be more inclined to kind of let this information out, or at least try to get it out of this question out of his hands, because, you know, hey, let's put this on some appellate court, because I don't want any more to deal with this, because I've had threats against my life and all this other crazy stuff. And so, but I wanted to also ask you about process, because one of our listeners who also is on the Discord, a lot of fun, a guy named, that's not his real name, the Poopsicle. Let's hope it's not his real name. I'm sure it's not. But he said, he posted an article. It was really interesting, an argument from, I think it was The Spectator, suggesting that we should maybe think about changing the process for obtaining search warrants for high-ranking government officials. Now, this is not a problem that comes up a whole lot, right? But you can sort of look forward, and this kind of gets into me saying that, well, we're kind of dealing with problems that traditionally we haven't really had to deal with, but it looks like there could be a lot more of this now, because I think both you and I agree that this sets a dangerous and concerning precedent, right? No matter what the FBI ends up finding. And so as part of this article, the author argued that, well, maybe there should be like a process where if it's a president, vice president, or former president, vice president, members of Congress, federal judges, that sort of thing, that there should be like some kind of a special 3-judge panel that reviews future applications, and a legal requirement that the attorney general, the FBI director sign off on these things. And maybe even you could maybe consider some requirements as to publicly information about the reasons for, or the parts of the affidavit, that sort of thing. I was wondering what you think about having a separate process for certain officials. I mean, maybe it wouldn't be those details exactly, but I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
I not having read the Spectator article, but just based on what you're telling me, I would be opposed to that.
Okay, and why is that?
For the reasons of, I don't think we ought to have a different legal process for those folks, right? I mean, probable cause is probable cause. What I think we ought to have is more consideration in the political process, and using good political judgment on these cases. So here's the thing: if this turns out that Trump had, stacks of top secret nuclear stuff laying around that he was gonna hand over to someone else, either friends, family, or someone suggested, put on the walls at various Trump hotels as memorabilia, or whether he was going to sell them to the Russians. If that turns out to be the situation, then we're going to say, okay, wow, the Justice Department did the right thing.
Yeah.
If, on the other hand, it's just random stuff, none of which seems to have much, real defense value, either was declassified formally or informally, but those sort of things. I mean, I think it's going to be a much. People are going to look at this and say, "Wow, it looks like DOJ was overreaching, and this looks like a political persecution." So I think it comes down to me the political judgment of our attorneys, and also secondly the brass there saying, one, how big a deal is this? To kind of get the information or get what I need another way without starting a political bonfire. And then three, it is, I forget what 3 was.
Well, and on 2, I'll say if that parts of that affidavit actually are released, we'll have a better sense of exactly what that process was, because there's talk that, well, actually there was a long process, and there may have been a Trump attorney who signed a document saying that, yes, everything has been turned over, when in fact that wasn't the case. But we don't know that. That's just all kind of leaks here and there, right? It seems to me that the Justice Department may have been put in kind of a no-win situation, because sort of how I envision this, I don't think I could be wrong, certainly. I don't think that there was any Trump plan saying, I'm going to keep these things and I'm going to sell them to the Russians or the Chinese or someone and to raise money for X. I find that highly implausible. What I find a lot more plausible, and in keeping with what I think is Donald Trump's character, is he takes all this stuff because he can, because it's his, and because, well, you never know, it might be useful someday. It gives me some leverage. And so, well, okay, does that mean that he had plans to sell it specifically? No, I don't think that. I would be stunned if someone could make an actual plausible legal case, right? And so I think probably the most plausible case you can build is that he took these things, they're sensitive things. What was he going to do with them? Well, we don't have any evidence that he was going to necessarily do anything. But Trump being Trump, I could see him saying, hey, let's keep this in my back pocket. Maybe I can use this.
Well, or I would say I don't even know that, because I would be surprised, and these are things we'll learn later, if Trump even knows what was in all those boxes.
I'm sure some of them,
Right? I mean, this is a thing of it's, Trump doesn't pack the box. When a president leaves the White House, they typically don't pack the boxes themselves.
No, hardly.
You have they're carrying it out to the moving truck, and you tell the GSA, hey, take everything in these cabinets, take everything in this room, box it up, and send it. So that, I mean, I don't think it was, and again, we'll find out. But is there a conscious thing of, I want to make sure I get the top secret info I have relating to the president of France?
But what I mean about the no-win situation,
it's more just, hey, this is my stuff. I want it. I'm keeping it. You guys want it back. I'm Trump. I don't want to give it to you.
Yeah. But what I mean about the no-win situation, just to clarify, is that if you are, DOJ, Attorney General Garland, those folks, and you get what you feel is plausible and reliable information that the former president has, say, sensitive nuclear documents, and who knows what he's going to do with them. How do you, and you
got to do something.
Yeah, you can't just say, well, geez, I don't want to get involved in that, we've asked for them a couple times, and this is what I'm saying. Maybe we don't know, but let's say that there actually was a process, and then they had good reason to believe that folks representing Donald Trump were lying to them about turning stuff over. Then there comes a point where you say, well, we need to do something. And I don't know if I mentioned this last week, but you said, well, there's an election coming up, and do we want to we don't want to do this too close to the election. And so do we wait until after the election? But that gives them a lot more time to do something potentially with it. And is that a concern? And so it's a really bad situation, no matter kind of how you look at it. I don't see there's any way that DOJ acts here that doesn't cause some problems. I think that's what I mean by no win.
Yeah, no, I think there's always, but it's a matter of, again, often your choices in government and politics, it's not between good and bad, or even better and worse.
Yeah.
It's between, bad and
more bad. No, absolutely.
And that's just the way it is. So maybe this will turn out to be the less bad alternative. Although, again, I think it's again, and I'm not. I want to be clear, because there's so much misunderstanding, I think, from our listenership.
Jay's very misunderstood. Like, go ahead.
I'm not saying that, is Trump guilty or innocent or whatever he's being charged with. I don't know. I mean, he's again, hasn't really even been charged. Does he have good reasons for keeping this? I don't know. But my point is, when there's this extraordinary step taken, the public trust sort of would demand more transparency.
Yeah. No,
or let's put it this way: the greatest level of transparency that you can achieve without compromising the investigation.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. No question. So, I want to move into a sort of related thing, very related thing, actually, because we discussed this last week. One of the things that the Justice Department may be investigating Donald Trump for is potentially violating the Espionage Act. And, that sounds serious. No one wants to be, accused of espionage, right? And so, I could see where it'd be understandable if you hear Rand Paul was in the last week saying, well, we need to repeal the Espionage Act. It's like, okay, so yeah, we don't want Donald Trump to be, tried for espionage, right? But I think before we consider that, it's helpful to look at a little history of the Espionage Act. And, this dates from 1917. Congress passed this at the urging of President Wilson, who essentially wanted to suppress dissent about U.S. involvement or potential involvement in World War I. And initially, it didn't just prohibit gathering, transmitting, losing information, as the Act says, with intent or reason to believe it's used to the injury of the United States or the advantage of any foreign nation. I'm for that, right? But there were also these amendments passed in 1918, just a year later, that prohibited speech that was considered disloyal or abusive to the United States. Now, those blatantly...
These were your original progressives.
Yes.
People.
Now, these were blatantly unconstitutional amendments, and they were repealed in 1921. And in fact, there haven't been...
not before prosecutions were upheld by the Supreme Court.
That's right. That's right.
Against Debs and Schenck, and for things like essentially making arguments against the draft, against World War I. Yeah,
absolutely. So, but when Senator Paul is talking about the Espionage Act, he called it an egregious affront to the First Amendment. And, I think that's certainly true of those amendments I just mentioned. But I went through the full text.
That stuff's been gotten rid of by now.
I mean, I went through the full text of it. I read it all just yesterday. And honestly, Jay, I don't see any egregious affronts to the First Amendment. I mean, it certainly prohibits certain speech, but to me, it seems like it's a narrowly tailored means of achieving a compelling governmental objective, which makes it perfectly okay on the First Amendment. And so I wanted to get your take. Is Rand Paul just sort of politically posturing here, or what do you think about the Espionage Act as it stands today?
So, well, Rand Paul, I mean, if you consider where Rand Paul is coming from, right, that he is pure libertarian, hardcore, I can sort of get that, right? Because I think in Rand Paul's world, and maybe I don't want to put words in his mouth, but much less information would be classified than is classified now, right? And it's almost like sort of this, like I said, very much libertarian, chaotic good kind of alignment, right? So for example, the Pentagon Papers case, right? I mean, a lot of it'd be that kind of argument that I think Rand Paul, as a libertarian, would certainly have argued. Listen, this information actually probably could be damaging to the U.S. war, but it wasn't a clear and present danger to the war. So therefore, it should be released, and you should not be prosecuted for possessing it or passing it on. So I think part of it comes from his libertarian standpoint, right? The clear and present danger type standard, yelling fire in a crowded theater, that kind of thing. I think he would put that standard much higher than other people would, if you follow me. So I'm sure there's some political posturing in it. But as you said, the speech component is not what it once was. I mean, there were prosecutions under this against Jehovah's Witnesses for sending out the Watchtower, right? Because it was sort of had a pacifist anti-war message, that sort of thing. It's not in the bigger stuff. Actually, I think it was 1952. The hand and classified, and the interesting thing that I learned, that I think there is an interesting argument, is on the void for vagueness type thing. Now, there's a Supreme Court case that said found it was not void for vagueness, and void for vagueness means that if a criminal statute is so unclear as that you can't really tell if your conduct is prohibited by it, then it can't be enforced against you. So the Espionage Act actually says that what it's illegal to do is to have, let me make sure I have this right, a material related to the national defense that you shouldn't have.
And that's, I mean, what does that mean? I think that's a reasonable
Exactly,
point to raise. What is related to national defense? Well, that's a lot of stuff. And so I get that. I think it walks right up to
it's
that
not
line.
just classified stuff, and it could be other stuff that's military, some stuff that maybe is non-military. So I think you could maybe have an as applied void for vagueness, or I don't know if you can have an as applied void for vagueness. That's a good question. But I think you could have a challenge. The court might look at it differently than it did. I think that case was like in the early 80s. Yeah.
Well, and the problem, I think, with making it more narrow, the definitions is that, well, let's say, it's wild hypothetical, you have a president who's a Russian agent and he declassifies a whole bunch of things. And so he doesn't violate the Espionage Act, right? Because the new and improved Espionage Act says it's only classified documents. Well, the president says, I declassified all this. So, I mean, so it gets really tricky. And to me, it comes down to can you convince a judge and a jury that this is actually related to the national defense? And also, I should point out, there's a section in it saying that the person who's being charged has to have intent or reason to believe that this information. So it's not like an innocent mistake.
And I think that's on Trump's other real big defense.
Yeah, exactly. Because we just told him to pack it up, and we didn't know it was in there, and so and so it seems to me. Well, I should point out also that this hasn't been used a whole lot, the Espionage Act, though the Obama administration used it a bunch. They charged 8 people with leaking. That's mostly used against leakers, where there's pretty clearly intent, right? Because you're doing this,
exactly. You're taking it. Yeah, I think there was the Chelsea Manning and that case comes
the
to
Assange,
mind.
and so Trump. There were, I think, 6 leakers charged during the Trump administration. But the point being is, it's done. It's generally only used or a charge that's leveled when there's actually it's pretty clear that there was intent here, right? That you knew this.
It's usually not for just the possession of documents.
Exactly. Which is why I still find it really hard to envision a non kind of tinfoil hat conspiracy sort of thing, that there's this strong enough case that could be made against Donald Trump to kind of justify all this in a way. I hope I'm wrong, right? Because if not, then boy, this just sets us down a road that's going to be a really ugly road potentially. And so I really hope I'm wrong about this. But gosh, I don't know. We'll see, I guess, maybe.
Yeah. But, one more thing I do want to throw out, just because, and this doesn't even actually relate to Trump, but in doing a little bit of the research on this, and, I use with the word research in quotes, but I knew the Espionage Act came from 1917 and about these Wilson era prosecutions. But it was used, even later than that, and in ways that I think Americans today would very much find shocking.
Yeah.
And in terms of what was seen as being, anti-patriotic, or again, just hey, I don't know about this war. Shut up, you're going to jail. And these were prosecutions from the federal government that stuck. There was also a piece I read about how did it was so much of the enforcement, of course, was left to U.S. district attorneys and sort of their impression of it. And there was, I don't know if it was Debs or it was another one of these guys who look, I probably wouldn't be a fan of what they're saying, but had given this speech numerous locations across the country and in a bunch of jurisdictions. The prosecuting, the district attorney there thought, well, all right, that's fine, free speech. And in one of them, the attorney for that district said, no, we got to press charges. So again, there's even this weird mismatch that look, you can violate the Espionage Act, or you could, at least under the former, in one district, but not in another. So anyway, it just strikes me so often people, when they say things are shocking or unprecedented, or this is the worst thing that's ever happened in our history. No, not really.
Yeah.
I'm not
And
not to justify either, just to put it in context.
And also, it's one thing if you're being accused of this and you are a decimillionaire or a billionaire former president, and another thing if you're just some guy who doesn't necessarily have a whole lot of resources, and the weight of the government coming down on you is a pretty significant thing, certainly.
I've got a really good quote on that. It is from I think it was either Brandeis or Holmes. So this actually was in Abrams versus the United States, and Justice Holmes did dissent with Brandeis, and Holmes said, to sort of Mike's point, that nobody can suppose that the surreptitious publishing of a silly leaflet by an unknown man without more would present any immediate danger that its opinions would hinder the success of the government arms or have any appreciable tendency to do so. And I think it's sort of, you can put that in today's terms of look, just some crazy poster on social media is when there's this urge to, oh my gosh, we got to do something or ban. So even Holmes, who came around on this question, would say, look, if it's a surreptitious, silly leaflet by an unknown schmuck, we ought to just let it go. So
yeah, absolutely. I think you and I are in firm agreement that we should not prosecute.
We are those unknown schmucks. Mike.
Yeah, exactly.
we are sort of these.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Let's move on to something entirely different, actually. Primary elections, because they continued this week, and the focus really was on two of the less populous states, Alaska and Wyoming. I wanted to start with Alaska, where moderate Republican Lisa Murkowski, who voted to convict President Trump in his impeachment trial, was actually the top vote getter over Trump-endorsed Republican Telly Shabaka. And in the race for that one House seat in Alaska, Trump endorsed Sarah Palin, a blast from the past. She was the top Republican vote getter, though Democrat Mary Peltola received more votes than Palin did, and she might actually be the favorite going into Alaska's new ranked choice system in November. So, in other words, we have Murkowski surviving basically and seemingly doing better than anyone else, and then we have Sarah Palin also doing really well. So. What do you make of these Alaska results? What do they tell you about Trump's power, authority, what have you? Any of that stuff? What did you take away from it?
Well, I think there is something that said that all elections are local, and also do sort of turn on the merits of those candidates. So in this case, Murkowski, who has a long history. Family history in Alaska of winning, and I think Trump's shadow did not reach that far, right?
And I think Alaska's weird.
I think that's.
I mean, I mentioned that they have a ranked choice system now. They're just starting.
Oh, I was going to mention that. Yeah. How you like your ranked choice voting now?
I like it a lot, actually. Alaska and Maine are doing it. I think it's awesome. Kind of those two kind of, but yeah, I mean, I think.
The idea though is I mean, if it is just at this point Murkowski and Chewbacca.
Yeah, I mean, I still think ranked choice voting is the way to go. I mean, the point of a voting system shouldn't be that, well, the candidates that I want to win because I'm gaming the system through a voting. So no, in terms of will ranked choice voting always result in the candidate I want winning? No, and that shouldn't be that way. So, but I would hate to think that I'm the sort of person who would say, well, this system doesn't lead to my preferred policy results, so therefore it must be wrong.
That's very big-minded of you.
I think that's just kind of how I am.
Yeah, intellectually honest.
Yeah, I think that's me, big-minded and intellectually honest. But yeah, so to me, it's kind of a mixed thing. Like so Murkowski has a long history. Alaska's kind of a weird state in a lot of ways, right? And Sarah Palin, she's got a weird history. So Alaska, I can almost want to put Alaska aside, right? I think what's more interesting to me is the main event here. Last week's primaries was from Wyoming, right?
Okay, wait, one more time though.
Oh yeah,
who's the second second choice after Murkowski?
Shabaka.
I've been waiting all week to do that.
Well, moving on from Wookiee, we're getting weird into the pop culture of our youth with Wookiees and the Dukes of Hazzard and so forth. I don't know, but so I want to get on to Wyoming because I think it was more or less a foregone conclusion that Liz Cheney was going to lose to Trump's choice, right? Harriet Hagman, and Cheney lost big. I mean, a 2-1 margin.
Bigly.
Yeah, bigly.
Yes.
Now, Cheney has strongly hinted about a 2024 presidential run. She told supporters it's something she's thinking about, and she's going to make a decision in coming months, and that her priority is going to be doing whatever it takes to keep Donald Trump out of the Oval Office. Now, looked at one way, it's a pretty swift fall from power for Cheney. I mean, just a year ago, she was the number 3 Republican in the House. She comes from a traditionally powerful Republican family, kind of representing the sort of pre-Trumpian era of the party. And so, Jay, you are the one Republican in the House here in our conversation here. So what do you take away from Cheney's loss, and how do you see, what might be next for her?
Well, all right. So there was somewhere, I believe it was National Review, that said, listen, you can view Liz Cheney's loss as she went down in very much a defense of principle and standing for what was right. You can also say it was a stunt of sort of monomania and bad political judgment, and that both of those can be absolutely true at the same time. If you follow me, and so my issue with Liz Cheney is I think she voted the right way when she voted to impeach Trump the second time. We've been over this a couple times. I think I would have argued differently or made statements saying, "Listen, this is more a dereliction of duty as opposed to this was a coup attempt to take over the government." And I think what Cheney initially was going to do on the committee to say, "Listen, we need answers for January 6th. It's important to know who did what." I think those are important questions. But it sometimes happens. There's this weird anti-Trump effect it's intoxicating. That once you come out against Trump hard, all these other people jump up and they love you and they're patting you on the back. And I think it must feel really good, right? You're one of the good ones. And so I think she got too much into that. I mean, so much of her statements in the committee did not sound like the statements of a unbiased fact finder of I'm trying to get to the bottom of this. It came off very much the Adam Schiff, Benny Thompson type argument that this was a, and I think that's the thing. I think if she had steered a narrower course, she might still have lost. But I think she would not have lost as bigly. And I think you could have. Because look, I have a lot of issues with the January 6th commission and the way it's being handled, and the whole idea. And this goes to sort of what we talked about with the search warrant as well. Is if can the public have confidence that this is a fair and impartial exercise in searching for the truth? And I think that's kind of tough to do. I mean, for example, people point out, like, well, she could have stood up and said, "Listen, I'm not going to subpoena Ginny Thomas's emails because they would seem to have absolutely nothing to do with this, and it's just an attempt to use this committee to try to embarrass her husband and force him to recuse himself on potential issues, that sort of thing." Likewise, after Cassidy Hutchinson testified, and that was sort of when the whole thing really got exciting, right? Hey, there's really new stuff here, and it's this, Trump tried to grab the steering wheel and all that. You had some Secret Service agents who came forward and said, "No, that didn't happen. We'll testify to that." And yet they weren't called. And I don't want to pin this on Cheney, but on Kinzinger, right? Said, "Well, look, those guys are liars anyway." all that sort of speaks to that, this was not a serious process, and she's seen as not so much standing up for the Republic or Republican ideas, but making common cause with, again, Benny Thompson and Adam Schiff.
And I think that's one reasonable way to interpret it. Another, I would argue, reasonable way to interpret it is that she has been immersed in the potential crimes and corruptions and malfeasance of Donald Trump in a way that you and I and most people can't even imagine. And it's entirely reasonable to suggest that the more she was exposed to this as a decent, principled person who wanted to do what's best for the country, she thought, oh my God, I knew he was bad, but I had no idea. And just being battered with this day after day after day.
She may know more than what we know.
Let's hope so. I mean, given the amount of time she's put on this, I would think so. So I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm just saying there's another, and both of those things could also be true to a certain extent. And also there could be just the political calculation of listen, there's no point in me being this kind of milquetoast, kind of on the fence sort of person.
Right. No, I agree with that too. That eventually Trumpism will collapse upon itself, and then she'll be the last person standing.
Exactly. So all three of those things could certainly be true to a certain extent. And we should point out that on Wednesday, Cheney filed with the FEC to establish a leadership pact called the Great Task. Right. There's no question. I think she's going to be able to raise millions of dollars for that. And like you said, she might very well be positioning herself as, probably not for 2024. I don't see a non-Trumpian candidate emerging, but you could sort of see a 2028 sort of thing when maybe she envisions a situation in which this is blown up in the party's face. They're ready to kind of reimagine, if you will, or go back to kind of a traditional sort of republicanism. They're looking for someone who has stood firm against it and repudiated Donald Trump, who's now serving, 10 to 20 for God knows what, right? And then there's Liz Cheney. She was right all along. So you can kind of see that as being a potential future for her under that kind of scenario.
Yeah. But I think, she still could have made that. Again, my issue isn't so much with what she did, but how she did it.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying there, and
it's sort of that is a little bit. I don't want to say offensive because that word is used so often and so inappropriately. But it's a big turnoff to Republicans. Who may like me, right? I've got a lot of bad things to say about Donald Trump. I think you can say a lot of bad things, and a lot of them would be true. But it's another thing to jump on board with the
I hear what you're saying.
People who spent 6 years telling us he's a Russian spy.
No, I hear what you're saying, and I agree to a certain extent. It reminds me of I recently did an interview with a guy who named Bill Kuhn, who wrote a book called Facts and Fury. The subtitle, you'll love this, an unapologetic primer on how the GOP has destroyed American democracy. So I'm sure it's on your reading list, right? But so I asked, one of the questions I asked him is, this is a really inflammatory book. You use words like fascist and all this, and unironically, seriously. And I said, so why'd you do that? And he said, I'm actually a pretty moderate, reasonable guy. In our conversation, which will be, it'll be out in a couple of weeks here. He really is. But he said, I needed to find a way to get my message out. And I realized that if I was just as kind of like, there are some things I'm not so crazy about, that's going to get totally lost in all of the noise. And so I think there's this tension, right? And we can maybe see it in Cheney saying, well, how do I get heard? How do I give myself a platform and put myself out there as someone who can maybe take us on a different course without engaging in this sort of rhetoric? And I think that's really tough to do, and it's getting tougher all the time. And so that, I think, maybe plays into it as well.
Yeah. No, I think that sounds right.
Yeah. And so, more broadly, Jay, if we take a look at the impeachment 10, right? I mean, four of them And of course, I mean the 10 House members who voted, Republicans who voted to impeach. 4 of them decided to retire. Kind of seeing the handwriting on the wall, right? 4 of them were successfully primaried. And so we have 2 survivors out of that 10. In one of those races, Donald Trump didn't even make an endorsement in a California district that Biden actually won by 13 points. And so, I mean, when I look at this, there are 2 ways I look at this, Jay. I say, well, number one, I say, well, this shows that, and I think this is the way a lot of folks on the left look at it, and maybe some folks on the right, that Donald Trump is still a very strong and commanding presence, and this is a horrible thing for our republic. And I get that. But another way I look at it is any member of a party who votes to remove that party's leader from office is almost necessarily going to face an incredible blow. So, I mean, I'm trying to separate out, right, the exceptionalness of Donald Trump, again, using a very neutral term, with the fact of, well, party loyalty is about what being a party member is about. You know, you hear what I'm saying, right? I mean, so I don't know how extraordinary this actually is.
Well, and it's this weird sort of thing of they're asking, the question is, that it's posed to all of these, everyone in the Republican primary, if you're not the Trump candidate, sort of is, do you renounce Donald Trump and all his works?
Yeah.
And the idea that, you have to say it in a weird thing, because right, I get that question all the time. People are always, emails, why won't you deny? And it's sort of this well, there's no benefit for Republicans to do that, really, right? And there is a significant cost for them to do that.
Yeah.
Because you can say, and it was funny. I was talking with someone who is a lifelong Democrat the other day, and sort of made the point of, look, as just who I am, I can't argue with a lot of the stuff that Trump did, policy wise. He's like, I think he's a horrible person. I mean, he's dreadful. He's a liar. He's all these things. But when you're calling on someone to, again, renounce Trump, his empty promises and lies and all his works and so forth, there's just no, if you're a Republican, there's no good answer. It doesn't get you anything to say yes. You get a lot of pats on the back from Democrats and say, wow, look how honest they are. Good job. And then they'll completely scorch you in the next election, right? You'll be a fascist in 3 weeks afterwards. But
I think even if you take a more nuanced position and you say, I believe that on policy, Trumpism makes a lot of sense. And even if you don't necessarily, there are some things where you probably wouldn't on immigration and that kind of thing. But even if you, then you say, but I'm very much against the saying that elections were rigged and so forth, when all the evidence says they're not, you're still going to get scorched, because there are tens of millions of Republicans who absolutely believe that the election system was rigged against Donald Trump and always will be. Right. And so how do you navigate that? There's no good way to kind of do that, basically.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. But I do want to point out, there is this weird sort of anti-Trump fever of people who have dealt with him. And maybe it is just a thing of, once you've dealt with him, then you're like, oh my God, I gotta stop this guy. But the other person that comes to mind is Ohio Governor John Kasich, who ran against Trump for the primary, and who I voted for. I wrote in back in the day. In this weird sort of thing of when he ran, Kasich still had 2 years left in his term as Ohio governor. But after he lost the primary, he turned his efforts almost exclusively into just bashing Donald Trump. It was sort of like he completely sort of forgot that he was, the governor of Ohio and doing other, Ohio and Republican things.
A day job, yeah.
Yeah, and I because I'm on the mailing list, right? And I would get these every day of just, another Trump outrage and all this sort of thing. And I'm still getting them. And it's just sort of this weird sort of thing. And so, much of the Ohio Republican Party turned on him very quickly. And to me, it's not necessarily the he's not supporting Trump enough. It's why are you doing this, right? There's other fights to be had.
I really
right?
think, Jay,
I mean, you could be out there making the case for a strong Republican policy on something else and just not worrying about. I mean, I think the candidates who are saying quite rightfully, look, this next election isn't about what happened or didn't happen in 2020. It's about fixing inflation. It's about putting our economy, getting people back into the job market, that sort of thing.
I just really think, Jay, it's because anyone who spends any time in the orbit of Donald Trump or thinking about Donald Trump, it's really hard to I think for anyone to do that and say, he's got his qualities here and there. I think
these are people I like and respect. Another one I put in that category is John Bolton.
Yeah.
Right. Who's just again vehemently anti-Trump always all the time.
I say these are the kind of
justified. Yeah.
I mean, it seems like it's one way or the other. It's like you don't say like, well, I'm kind of a lukewarm Trump supporter or a lukewarm Trump opponent. It's, you spend any amount of time with him or thinking about him or looking at him that he's just so more incredibly polarizing than perhaps anyone I can think of in our lifetimes, in that sense. So I wanted to ask you, do you think Cheney ends up running in 2024 anyway? I mean, well, what's your take on that? Because it seems,
I hope not.
Yeah. Well, why is that?
Well, I think one, third parties are always a disaster.
Secondly, running as a Republican, I would assume she would run.
Yeah, no, I don't think she runs as a Republican.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't think she would enter the primary because I think she would get trounced at that point.
I don't see her renouncing her party. I think Cheney's mission, as she sees it, is to bring back the Republican Party to the Republican Party of kind of her father's era, basically. And that's actually, I think, the Republican Party that you're kind of a fan of for the most part. Yeah. So
if we could get Dick Cheney to run, and my God, he's still tough enough. He could do it.
Yeah, but
I would in a minute. I'd be out campaigning for him.
But I mean, I can see a scenario where Cheney gets, say, the minimum percentage of in polling to appear on the debate stage. Though I think probably what the RNC does, I think they did this in 2016, is say, well, we're imposing this loyalty test. If you don't pledge to support the eventual nominee, then we're not going to let you be part of the debates. And Cheney, of course, won't do that. I mean, Trump did it, but then he kind of renounced it when he thought there might be a possibility he wouldn't be the nominee. But but I don't think Cheney gets on a debate stage with Donald Trump. Though, as I said, some folks, I would pay. I think it would be a great pay-per-view event if you could get Chris Christie, Donald Trump, Liz Cheney, Ted Cruz on the stage. I would love to see how that debate would play out. I think it'd be Ron DeSantis. I mean, I think that would be a fascinating thing to actually watch, because a lot of folks, I think, would have looked at this whole thing we've been talking about. I mean, for a lot of the episode, right, with the Mar-a-Lago raid, say, well, this actually makes it more likely that Trump is going to be the nominee because so many people just feel like, well, see, the deep state is against.
It does. Yeah.
And, there are people who are supposedly close to DeSantis supporters saying that now he is less likely to kind of go up against Trump. And DeSantis isn't that old. You can see him saying, well, 2028, that's fine. I don't want to destroy myself in 24 running against Donald Trump because there's no way he's running in 2028. So, I mean, I don't know. I look at the landscape.
Especially if, eventually a year and a half from now, we get a less redacted version of the affidavit.
Yeah.
And it turns out to be a big nothing burger.
Yeah. And I think that's more likely than not, given what I have to say about which is not to say that I think that the Department of Justice shouldn't have done anything. But I think that.
And also there will be, let's put it this way. I fully believe before we get to 2024, there will be a prosecution of Donald Trump over January 6th.
And that might be possible. Yeah, I'm a little less convinced of that. But so I guess when I look at all of this, I am more convinced than ever, given what we've seen and given what we know about the Republican primary process and primary voters in general, that Donald Trump is, I'm more convinced than ever that he is going to be barring, imprisonment or health, he is going to be the Republican nominee in 2024.
I think that's if I were a betting man right now, given the recent events, I think that's probably right.
Yeah, and I think we both probably also agree that is very unfortunate for the Republican Party in the country.
Yeah.
There we go. Well, all right. Before we on that unfortunate note, before we go, I wanted to mention something that's maybe a little more fortunate, at least I found. So when I was mowing the lawn yesterday, I was listening to When the People Decide. I mentioned it before, but really, if you're not listening to it, you definitely should. This episode's last week, a bunch of stuff, the ex-felon disenfranchisement, a really kind of compelling story about, are you always a felon who serves your time? Jay, how's that work? An ex-felon, right?
I would think...
Anyway, a guy who committed a felony was convicted in Florida and ended up getting his law degree and working in this movement to overturn the felon disenfranchisement in Florida, which was successful, and about Medicaid expansion in Idaho, and kind of on a more theoretical basis, how citizen initiatives can almost work like invisible third parties in a way, because, of course, legislatures don't like it when people try to take away their power and do their jobs, and it's kind of pros and cons of that. But it was really interesting stuff, and it made mowing the lawn, which is not my favorite thing in the world, go much more quickly. And so I appreciate that. So Jenna, great job again. And if you're not listening to When the People Decide, do that, and you can get it wherever you get the politics, guys. And Jay, we haven't done recommendations in a while. You watch things and do things and listen to things. We should do some.
Man.
Do you have something? I don't know if you do. Maybe you don't.
Gosh, no, I'm afraid I don't. I'm horribly unprepared.
Oh, well, I will recommend something since I'm the one who mentioned it, actually. Kimberly and we're just finishing up watching season 1 of Reacher on Amazon. And it's horrifically violent. In so many ways, in ways that are really just almost like, wow. But it's also like oddly old fashioned in certain ways. And I find myself, there are these, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. There are these things you watch and you're like, you cannot wait until the next episode. And Kimberly woke up today. She said, I have a theory about like first thing, like not even like good morning, just like, and it's always cool when you find things like that. I'm so happy to find out that they have a second season. And so, like I said, it has kind of an old fashioned vibe. He's a good guy who's, he's not like this anti-hero type of person. He's not like a Saul Goodman, and I just, finished like a lot of people, Better Call Saul, and it's very sad and so forth. But he's not an anti-hero. He's just like this heroic guy, and he's doing the right thing. And so yeah, Reacher, I can recommend it highly enough, I suppose. I understand it's not great art, but it's been a lot of fun, and so I will recommend Reacher. And next week, maybe Jay, or next week I think Trey and Ken are doing the show, but the week after that, maybe you'll have something fantastic.
Yeah, I'll come up with something for then. Yeah.
And also, I just wanted to say before we do go, I want to thank some new supporter, Kevin. Thank you very much, Kevin. And also Andra, who has always been a fantastic supporter of the show, recently increased her already incredibly generous level of support. Thank you very much. And also a supporter on Venmo, Estevam, who's been a supporter for a while and just yesterday made a very, very generous contribution to the cause. So thank you very much. If you want to contribute to the cause, you can do that on Patreon. It's the link is, I know this, patreon.com/politicsguys. If you want to support us on Venmo, like Esteban did, we're at Politics Guys, and you can also support us on PayPal, and all of our support links are at the show notes, as well as politicsguys.com/support. You get all kinds of stuff. You get, ad-free versions of the shows. You get our special midweek bonus show, which Jay and I will be recording in just a minute. It releases on Tuesdays now. And yeah, all kinds of other stuff at different levels. We hope you will check it out. And whether you're a supporter or not, it really does help if you can rate and review the show on whatever podcast app you use, as well as sharing episodes on social media to kind of spread the word. We really do appreciate it. If you want to get in touch with us for any reason whatsoever, you can do that. Well, mail at politicsguys.com, that kind of old school 20th century email type of thing, but also social media. There's Facebook and Twitter, and the links for that are in the show notes, as well as if you're a supporter on our Discord app, which I check in on every day, is a whole lot of fun. The guys, Urgicles, Poopsicle, a whole bunch of guys. It's a lot of fun. Check it out. And and special thanks before we go to our executive producers. We really do appreciate you so much. Bruce Johnson, Wilma Moreno, Andra Masker, Daniel Toe, and Ryan Beasley. And we'll be back with a new show for you next week. We hope you'll join us.